One of the more fascinating things that emerges is the definition of or construct of a particular category or how people come to terms with something that simply didn't exist before. And I've been at the receiving end of that in multiple things. Um, I often sort of think about myself, and if you look at people that go through, there's this sort of there's this thing I like to call it neurodiversity, but some people call it, ADHD or ADD, and it's this idea that there is in the sort of central processing part of your brain, executive function part of your brain doesn't function at the same pace as what other people's do. And I always thought like I was really slow on the uptake on some things. And, I couldn't talk in loud uh, crowds. I hate going to the bar. I can't remember people's names. And it was really like fascinating to me because people would say, you'd hear all these sort of motivational speakers, for example, well, you just have to memorize everybody's names, or, this is a common thing that people talk about. And frankly, I can't remember anybody's names. There's no way that I'm going to be able to remember anybody's names. And, speaking in clubs and bars where people would say, oh, just go meet somebody, I'd never be able to do that because I frankly couldn't process the information that was going on there. I was kind of like dumbfounded. Um, and, what's interesting with this is the emergence of this particular category over time where, it really struck me when I realized that, yeah, you know what? There's been a lot of sort of struggles with who I am. Um, and I didn't really have a good feel for what exactly that was and why that was actually the case until in terms of processing. Until I started looking up in this stuff, and there's emergence of this in terms of thinking about, and this is why I like to think about neurodiversity rather than, that this is a particular, it's treated as like, oh, this is a syndrome or this is a negative thing. But in actuality, there's lots of ways that it's very helpful. And it gets you to sort of think about things in different ways. Um, and it's fascinating how we define ourselves, an emergence of this thing, and how we sort of reclassify this. The generation that followed me, maybe it was about 20 years after, um, they were much more open to sort of putting these particular categories on what they're actually doing. That didn't exist when I was growing up. It wasn't even a thing. Nobody even talked about it. Nobody even knew. Um, was not even a particular thing in terms of understanding this. Now, another thing that's interesting, and that was another moment that sort of struck me was when I heard the term first generation student before, right? I had not heard that until it was probably about 3 years ago. And then I started thinking about, wait a minute, that's me. I have never heard that. So the term is somebody that is the first in their family to go away to school. And it's go away to university. And, we know if you start looking into this sort of emerging thing, but we know that is it. There's a lot that goes on in terms of the sociology of it. There is, you have to view yourself in a completely different way. That there's a lot more challenges that you face, um, as much as other sort of things that you think about. And for me, um, I just was like, I never even heard of a lot of the things that happen. Right. And that's along the lines of the very same thing. It's not necessarily that this thing is ultra important. It's you just don't even know that it's not part of your vocabulary to even think about things or particular areas because nobody has done that for you. I remember, I think my wife's the same way. She's not first generation, but relatively first generation. Um, it's like nobody sat, and I'm perfectly okay with this. I think it's lovely. I had a great family experience growing up. My parents loved me, all that kind of stuff. But we did not sit down and do homework collectively. Um, and we do that now in my family. And this is just like a key thing, the difference of first generation student is that you will sit down and do those things. Whereas, when you're growing up and you don't have that, um, if you are in a family that is just not part of what they actually do, right? There's nothing wrong with that. It's just not what they do. And so I remember many times feeling like, oh, those are weird. I'm sitting down doing work in my bedroom or whatever, right? And it's fundamentally different when you think about all these particular things that go on. And there is this interesting thing, and you will go through this as well, right? As you grow up and you go through different stages of life, the reason why I know this is like an emerging thing is that, science evolves, right? So 10, 20 years, there's going to be a lot of stuff that's going to happen, and there'll be new categories and new things that pop up. And so as you live for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, 50 years, on and on and on, new things emerge and people think about things in a completely different way. I want you to sort of think about family, even, um, my family was great, growing up, right? More conservative, but, they were definitely more on the conservative side of things. But that didn't mean that they were out of place with, current culture and those kind of things. They're definitely on the conservative side, but still within culture. And how we understand family, how we understand parenting, how we understand men's feelings and just saying that men have feelings. Um, all of those things are new phenomenons that we've learned about in very short period of time that people even were considering. I remember growing up and there was great debate about whether I know this is so crazy. Please don't like get mad at me for saying this, but I do remember a time where it was open up to discussion where, mom was to work, right? Like that was an open discussion. Um, whether mom should actually work, right? It wasn't, my mom never worked, but this was an open discussion, very heated discussion at the time. And now it's very commonplace for mom to work and not crazy common, but becoming more common where mom even makes more money than dad, right? And all of these things are just new phenomenons. You're going to experience these things as you get older, and you'll realize, like, hey, wait a minute, that happened to me, and I didn't even know that was going on. And I'm somehow part of this thing that everybody sort of says, well, geez, Louise, oh, that's why that person is that way. And you're going to go through all sorts of things like that as you grow. And, I don't like the term grow, but as you go from one section of life to the next section of life, there'll be all sorts of things that will happen to you. And you'll look back and you'll say, wait a minute, I was part of that, or it was that, or it was that. And it doesn't mean that, part of me is like, when I hear that, I'm like, oh, crap, this explains so much. But at the same time, it doesn't, right? Like there is a lot that goes on behind the scenes. And these are just labels that people come up with that, yeah, they hold to some degree, but they're not as rigorous in the sense that you're thinking about, that they're strictly binding. And if you're part of those particular things, then all of a sudden your life falls apart. Or, if you're part of something else, your life is all of a sudden set. It's not the way it works. There's a lot more that goes on behind the scenes. As you start seeing the nuance of things that are going on, you can have a perfectly good, able-bodied brain, um, or come from, a situation that, man, you grew up and you had drove around in Ferraris for your life, right? But things still don't work out for you because there's a lot more that goes on. Science, the way that we understand it, we like to have these sort of cookie cutter stories. And the reason why that is the case is because that it makes it's easier to publish these particular things. But in reality, it's a quite big mess. The world is a mess, and you can't get yourself set into any particular thing and how we understand the world. There's a lot more to the nuance of life than how we understand it in a scientific way. All right, take care and have a wonderful day.